find it. Well, I up and lost my mind. When you and I go toe to toe, my love, well, it happens every time.
Hi there. We have Arkansauce with us in the podcast studio today for an interview and a performance with What's Up. The Newgrass String Quartet will release their fifth album independently on April 21st. The album is called Okay to Wonder. And let me tell you, dear listeners, this album is so good. Welcome to the studio, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Would you all mind introducing yourselves and telling our listeners what instrument you play for the band?
Sure, no problem. My name is Zach Archuleta. I play the acoustic guitar.
My name's Tom Anderson. I play the upright bass.
My name's Ethan Bush. I play mandolin.
My name is Adams Collins. I play the acoustic banjo.
And since this is my first time interviewing you as a band, would you mind telling me how you came to playing music?
Yeah, actually, I started music when I was 6, and I requested piano lessons from my parents. And after a month, I requested to quit taking piano lessons, and they denied me. So they're still forcing me to play music. Thanks, Mom.
For me, it was a lot later in life. I always had like a couple instruments laying around my room in high school, like a lot of high schoolers do, and they just collected dust for the most part. And then in my early 20s, Zach and I shared a few different rentals, and he played guitar. I had a mandolin. He played a little bit more than me, and we would just sit around and pick tunes late at night just for fun, you know, and not even songs necessarily, just kind of noodling around. And then slowly we just started to meet other people and learn more songs, and finally got to the point where it felt like we could go play on a stage somewhere, which might not have been true at the time, but that's how it started.
Didn't stop us, though.
And you guys were both in like a metal band. Is that what I heard in one of the interviews?
Zach was really heavy into a metal band for a lot of high school, and I was more of a support position. I did get to fill in for a few shows at one point when they needed a bass player, which was a pretty good experiment because I didn't really play bass either. But but it was a lot of fun.
All right. What about you, Tom?
I started kind of getting a strong interest in music when I was like 8 years old, and I stumbled across my parents' vinyl collection, and it might as well have been treasure chest for me at that age. And then when I was 13 or so, I saw just a real crappy beater acoustic guitar, classical nylon, in a garage sale for like $15, and I bought that and learned a few chords. Next year, saved all my corn picking money and bought an electric guitar, and just kind of kept doing it from there.
All right. And Zach?
Yeah, like Ethan said, our musical history is kind of intertwined and still is, obviously. But I was like in the heavy metal scene back in high school. We had a couple albums come out and did that for a few years, and it was really fun. Just not a lot of money in the metal band scene. There's like 10 bands on each show, so it's kind of hard to make a career out of it. But and then I had a job working at the first Wakarusa that was at Mulberry Mountain in 2009. And that's where I saw Yonder Mountain String Band and Split Lip Rayfield and all these other kind of jamgrass, bluegrass bands that's in the scene, and just fell in love with it from there. Mainly about the community, like not so much the music. I love the music, but just like the people that surrounded the music and like the vibes in the crowd and just like all the smiles on people's faces and stuff. It was quite the change from the metal scene.
I can imagine so. So, Ethan, in a recent interview, you said that the desire to create, inspire, and redefine within our scene seems to be the main driving force behind our music. And so I'm wondering, how do you all approach keeping a traditional style of music fresh when you sit down to compose?
I think for us it happens pretty naturally because we come from such diverse backgrounds musically, and we all came into bluegrass, country, folk music at different points in our musical journeys, you know, so we all have a lot of differentiating influence behind that, you know, or that came before that. And also it's a really popular genre within like the festival scene, like a kind of a jamgrass thing, and it kind of feels like that's kind of the fun part of it the whole time, is how to set yourself apart from the guys that came before, or the guys that are alongside you now in other bands. And it's really fun to listen to those bands when we're on the road and be like, oh man, that's genius what they did just there, because they're using a lot of the similar instrumentation that we're using, and it's so fun to hear them use it in different ways. Sometimes they're surprising, so we try to do the same thing with our music, and that becomes part of the game, part of the puzzle.
And do you all compose when you're on the road, since you spend so much time on the road?
We do a little bit. There's not as much downtime on the road as I always thought. Whenever I had friends that were starting to tour, I was always really excited for them, and I was like, "What is it like? What do you do?" And they're like, "You play shows and you ride in a van." And I always thought they were just wasting their time, like out there seeing the world, and squandering this opportunity to check places out. But after doing it for 8 years now, it's realized that. Usually we just have enough time to wake up, get a little food, maybe exercise or something, and then you drive somewhere, and then you're in the venue for 5 or 6 hours, and then you go home, go to sleep, and repeat that day after day. But we do get a lot of time picking in the green room, and we've done a little bit of riding on the road. A lot of times it's just working out ideas of stuff that's already been written, and just getting more opportunities to daily run through it. Whereas we normally practice twice a week, but we have a lot of stuff that we have to get through in rehearsal, a lot of business, and sometimes it's hard to get consistent repetition on new material. So
I'd say on the road, a lot of the song shaping happens on stage, mostly during jams and like working out songs. Like you said, we'll do something cool one night, and then the next night be like, oh yeah, I remember that, and kind of incorporate that. And that's how the songs grow and change on the road. The thing is, like you said, there's also, you play a town and you have to drive 4 to 6 hours, 7, 8 hours sometimes to like get to another town that's far enough away to warrant playing a show again. So it's like every day, like 4 to 6 hours of your time is taken up just in the van, just getting from place to another, and that's a pretty big chunk of your free time.
I imagine it's kind of exhausting too. I mean, it's just, I know from just road trips with my family, it's just like after about 5 hours, I'm ready to run screaming into the woods and never come back.
We all have headphones and cell phones now, so that kind of helps. We kind of all get our own little space, and we have a pretty large van with a bunk and stuff in it, so everyone kind of split up and do our own thing for a little while and kind of get your own little time to get in your own head.
All right. So for this album, you worked with James Tuttle, who's worked on albums for Leftover Salmon and The String Cheese Incident, and Brad Sarno, who worked with Sun Volt. Did you learn anything new from working with them, and do you think it changed your sound at all?
We actually worked with James and Brad on the previous album. We got linked up with James through a recommendation through our Yonder Mountain String Band tour. And Brad Sarno makes some incredible gear, musician's gear, kind of boutique pedal stuff, and he's just a genius when it comes to some sound. The nitty-gritty of how a preamp and a tube is going to really affect your signal chain. So, like, his pedals are on everyone from Bob Weir and all the Grateful Dead guys' boards. So working with them, I feel like it was just more of a keeping the consistency of it worked really well on the last album. They know what they're doing. Let's keep it going.
The capacity in which they work with the album kind of comes after our studio time too. It's like we have our engineer that we're working with in the moment while we're in the studio, and they're doing post mixing and mastering. So they're in different states. They get the material afterwards, and we do work with them back and forth over the phone or via email about certain things. But part of it is definitely letting go at that point and trusting them to do their thing and put their flavor on it. And so while we learn a little bit through it, I don't feel like it's as illuminating as our time with the engineer in the studio is necessarily.
Yeah, the thing that I feel like I've learned from working with different people, mastering, mixing and mastering. We record here in Fayetteville with Darren Crisp at Crisp Studios. And he's an excellent engineer, and he has an ear and a specific sound that he likes, and it sounds great, and he always gives us rough mixes or works on stuff, and then when we send it off to somebody else, they send it back, and it's like it sounds great also, but in a different way. And so it's been a learning experience for me to think about, like, it's not that there's a right and wrong way to do it. It comes down to taste and style, and it really does change the sound of the album. You can change the character of the album just by how it's mixed. And so, I think us as a band too, this time around, we're starting to wrestle with that and coming up with a unified idea about what we are going for and what we want it to sound like, what we want our album to sound like. And, it's kind of a fun part of the creative process that up until we started dealing with it, I was always just focused on the writing and the playing specifically. But, it's kind of like a different aspect of the creative process to make those decisions.
All right. And since this album was recorded over a longer period of time, I think you said you had 1.5 years to do this one. How did your life changes in that time period affect the recording of these songs, do you think? I know you had a baby, so.
I did, yeah.
He didn't have it.
I think, no, I didn't have it.
Yeah.
I played a small role at the very beginning. On the surface, I guess one of the easiest answers is that the thing, we're all developing our skills, our skill sets as musicians all the time. So there were definitely, for instance, some solos on the last few songs we did just a few months ago that maybe had those been the first 2 songs at the beginning, I might not have been as articulate or as creative with those solos. So just spanning that much time, your skills are going to change. And then I think the other thing is you kind of start to shift your focus, or I personally start to shift my focus after I've been working on the same album for a while. I might come in super hyped up about the vocals on a certain song or whatever, but by the end of the album, I'm starting to focus more. Once it's like we're in striking distance of finishing, then I start to think about little tiny minute details more, like things that were easy to gloss over in the beginning, like, oh, we'll fix it later. Well, now it's like it's coming down to it, and it's like, oh my gosh, where's my checklist? Like, what's the priorities here for me, really, when it comes down to it, So I think for me, that's the main thing, is my focus starts to really narrow towards the end about what can I live with and what can't I live with about my performances on the album,
I think the big difference for me on this one is that we just had so much time on the road to workshop these tunes. And the other albums, it was like we had these songs, went in the studio and recorded them within like a certain year or whatever. And this, we've had so long to like work on the songs and think about them and think about how they're put together and new things come to light. And going back in the studio and redo some songs and try some different parts. And that was unique for us, because before it was just go in 1 or 2 days, knock it all out, and we're done. And this album, we got to like stretch it out a little bit and kind of put a magnifying glass to everything and see what we really like and what we don't, and have the opportunity, if we didn't like that, to go back and like change it, and that was really refreshing for this album for me.
And also, like, even backing up one step further, this album was kind of started during the pandemic, during the original quarantine, and so we stopped touring, and we still kept our rehearsal schedule, and I personally just had mountains of time to practice. I was just sitting at home playing banjo for hours a day plus practicing. So it's like Ethan was saying, our skills really developed, but it kind of changed the nature of our rehearsals as well, because we weren't trying to adhere to a performance schedule and keep a repertoire fresh. And we were workshopping the songs every week, twice a week, and just being able to sit with them for long periods without the stress of being like, oh, we also need to make sure we brush this stuff off and have this stuff ready. And I think that's really played into a lot of the arrangements of the songs on this album. I feel like they have a lot more thought and detail, and everybody had a lot of more time to move their parts around and figure out what makes sense, where everybody needs to settle to make the best sound possible for each song.
It also meant we forgot all our old songs and had to relearn them.
All right. Okay, and Adams, you said that you were obsessively interested in how a 4-piece bluegrass band might emulate various styles of drum grooves and rhythms, and that you looked to 80s hip-hop and New Orleans funk when composing some of the instrumentals for this album. And so I'm wondering, since you have a jazz degree in percussion, how technical was that process for you, or was this something, as I know you guys jam a lot, so I'm wondering, can you walk me through that process a little bit of how some of the instrumentals came to light?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I studied percussion for a lot of years. I went to the U of A and then did some graduate work out in Colorado. And so during that period, I was involved in, I went to a lot of conferences and master classes, and, just hyper analyzing rhythm and rhythmic styles, and drum set players, and, how they orchestrate the instruments on the drum set to create these overall groove patterns that all lock in together. And in the banjo, I think I really was drawn to the banjo because it has this percussive nature, and playing with the finger patterns, they create a similar kind of textural stuff. And so when I'm writing these instrumentals, a lot of times I take a specific drummer or a specific genre of music that has a rich rhythmic concept, and then I sit at home and multi-track all of the instruments, and trying different rhythms, and then layering them together until I find something that makes sense, to where I'm taking basically the bluegrass ensemble and trying to approach it like a drum set player would, where one instrument is the hi-hat, one instrument's the kick drum, one instrument's the snare drum. And then I kind of start from there and create some textures that I like, and then go back and write melodies, that try and find melodies that are catchy and fun to play, which is a somewhat new creative process for me, but it's really fun, and I feel like it's just barely scratching the surface of what is possible, because we're not really a traditional bluegrass group. It's none of us grew up as going to bluegrass festivals, or none of us had parents that played bluegrass or even listened to bluegrass. And so it's as we were talking about before, we all have these different backgrounds, and the music that was first impressed upon us that comes out in our playing, and I try and think of leaning into that more than trying to be a traditional bluegrass band, because I feel like it's this rich, the trad bluegrass is a rich genre in itself, and I just don't feel like I'm gonna ever be capable of doing it justice, and so I'm more interested in thinking about what music is to me and where I come from, and trying to take the traditional bluegrass ensemble, but try and find new sounds and new ways to utilize the instruments and the voices and everything to create something that hopefully is representative of who we are, and also create a unique sound, something that sounds different than what everybody else is doing.
Okay. And your lyrics on these albums, they seem pretty familiar in comparison to your previous albums, but I wanted to ask about a couple of the songs. For My Home in Arkansas, Tom, you said that you had some specific influences for that one.
Yeah, mostly traditional bluegrass. I listened to a lot of Bill Monroe, and just we actually, to what Adams was saying earlier, we kind of realized we were stepping out in a lot of these grooves and patterns and songs, and we realized there's nothing on the album that's really like a more traditional up-tempo bluegrass tune. So it was just kind of diving into the old stuff And then it came pretty fast once I had the hook. It was like, oh, a lot of these Bill Monroe songs are just these classic traveling, missing the girl that you love, and that kind of thing. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
I still remember the morning that I left, how she cried, told me to hurry home. Been burning up the miles ever since that day, and I still have a ways to go. I'm a long, long way from my home in Arkansas. The road goes on, I guarantee. One of these days I'll be back on my way for that little darling waiting there for me.
the album is Cold Iron, which I really hope y'all play if you feel like it. But I understand. I understand that was inspired by a friend of yours. Can you talk a little bit about how you use other people's stories to create lyrics?
Yeah, sure. That was that's a friend of ours, Andrew Cold Iron. We were out at his place one night, and we had been hanging out all day out in the woods and drinking beers and stuff. And I don't know if I was the only one in the group that had never heard it before, but he just kind of gave the short version of his backstory of how he ended up in Arkansas. And it was really cool. He had left the place he was used to and came to Arkansas all alone at a pretty young age, not knowing anybody. And where he's at is out in Newton County where there's not anyone around. It seemed like a pretty isolating type of move for someone that age. And it was some old family property that was out there. His grandpa had begun a big house out there a long time ago, but it was still very raw and unfinished. And he just kind of picked up and kind of just did a whole reset on his young adult life there, and I just thought that was super impressive and found it pretty inspiring. And his last name's Cold Iron. Like, that's just like the coolest last name ever, especially if you're writing folk music, you know. Like, so I can't really exactly remember what sparked, like, okay, I'm going to write a song about it now. I do kind of remember the first night of sitting there and writing out some of the lines. But yeah, that kind of happens often. It's pretty rare that one song is inspired by one person all the way through like that, you know. But we just have so many friends that live similar lifestyles to us, not necessarily musicians, but that travel a lot for music festivals or for outdoor activities or for some other type of job. And I've always gathered a lot of inspiration from hearing their stories and just seeing the way they appreciate the same types of music we do, but through their own lens. You know, what goes on in their life to make them appreciate the music for a different reason. And then that makes me think about, while I'm writing, like, what can I write that they'll be able to all use through their different lenses, you know, something that can be interpreted different ways for everyone. So I try to not write too specific so that no one gets, you know, so that people can't relate. But even though I'm trying to write for a broad reception, a lot of little ideas from little places and different people's stories are what spark it in the first place, you know. I don't necessarily have a formula for that or anything. It just kind of happens. But that's how a lot of my songs are written anyways, and where a lot of my inspiration comes from.
So is that line, if you go looking for trouble out there, was that part of the original conversation, or was that something else that you brought in?
No, the most of the hook, the chorus of the song, was more of kind of my take on his situation, you know, and the verses were more specifically the information that he gave me, kind of worked around to make them sound pretty, you know, when sang. But then, like I said, when I try to then paint a broader picture that anyone can relate to, that's kind of what the chorus was in that song, you know. Use my own words and make it to where it's not so specifically about one dude traveling from one spot to another, but that anyone can apply that chorus to their life, I think, you know, if they think about it. So.
silver and gold of a different kind.
Now that Arkansauce has been a band for 10 years now, I believe, and your popularity continues to build, what do you hope Arkansauce looks like in the next 5 to 10 years?
Hopefully I still look the same and haven't aged any, personally.
We got lots of creams, lots of yoga. No.
I mean, from the beginning, personally, I just like, obviously the top tier success is something that would be amazing. But really just to be able to travel and support myself and be comfortable and be in a musical relationship with guys that I enjoy hanging out with and people I enjoy spending time with, and just to continue growing and growing our fan base, wherever it ends or wherever it stops, I just want to keep trying to growing and just keep trying to bring new stuff while keeping the old stuff alive,
Yeah, I just feel super fortunate to just to get out on the road. Our first tour, we pieced it together ourselves, and had to borrow a van, and we're sleeping in the van at rest stops, and the idea of even spending money on a single hotel room, was absurd because we were making like $200 a night for everything. And that to me felt like a success. We're touring, we did it. And from the first tour on, through the years, it's like we keep getting to tour, but everything gets a little more comfortable. We make a little bit more money. We went from sleeping in the van or on random people's floors and couches to like getting one hotel room and everybody's smashing into this one room to now we get 2 rooms and maybe someday we'll get 4 rooms. But and the quality of the venues we play are better, it's better sound systems, better rooms, and the quality of the crowds, are gone from 10 drunk people who don't know who we are to 50 people that are singing along, or 100 people, especially when we're several states from home and people are showing up wearing Arkansas shirts singing the lyrics. It's just super gratifying. And so, kind of echo what Zach's saying. It's like just continue to get to tour, but hopefully in a more comfortable lifestyle and with more rewarding results.
One of the bigger changes that we've had is we started doing all our own booking. And just showing up to the venues and relying on their house tech. So in the last year sometime, we hired a sound guy that travels with us. And we have a booking agent now out of Nashville. And then this year we hired a manager, also based out of Nashville. So that's taken a lot of the things, the workload that we were doing and putting it on some of them. And it's also taking care of things that we would have never thought to do ourselves. So hopefully in our growth, we see more people added to the team, maybe a light guy, maybe a merch person. So we can continue focusing on the music part of it and give up some of that to somebody else that wants to jump in a van and drive down the road.
Okay. All right. And are you planning any album release shows in Northwest Arkansas?
We've done an album, one show in the past, and this the strategy this time is more spread the love, kind of have a bunch of shows throughout a couple of month period to where we promote the album and stuff. And there's not really one specific show.
Okay, so I know you were playing Backwoods in April, and then you have Fresh Grass coming up in May. That's local. So when the album drops on April 21st, where can people get it?
Pretty much anywhere they typically stream their music, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, all that good stuff. Also, they can, of course, come to our website, www.arkansaucemusic.com, and buy hard copies as well. Hopefully, we're going to have CDs at first. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll have vinyls as well. And most importantly, they can come to an Arkansas show and get their hard copy face-to-face. That's what does us the best and is the most exciting for us. But, yeah, it'll be streaming everywhere that you generally listen to music. So Go listen.
Well, thank you all for joining me today, and that's all.
Yeah, thanks for
Thanks
having
for having
us.
us. Thanks.
Beautiful and I hit the street last night, pocket full of pain, head full of champagne, looking for the break of day, and I found it. Well, I found it in your arms. When you and I go toe to toe, my love, it's always cause for alarm. Well, I went to fetch the car, for I was too far gone to drive. Me and whiskey, we don't see eye to eye, I couldn't find it. Well, something must be wrong. While you and I went wild through the night, somebody else done took it home. Where do you run to, darling? Don't leave that heart upon the shelf. It ain't always easy to see through the eyes of someone else. Where we gonna run to, darling? Won't leave this heart upon the shelf. It's easy to please our masters when we ain't thinking of ourselves. Well, it's one for the back porch, baby, two for the road, three for when we disagree, and I can't let it go, I couldn't find it. Well, I up and lost my mind. When you and I go toe to toe, my love, well, it happens every time. Well, I went to fetch the dog, Lordy, when he gets so fast. Feels like yesterday he was rolling in the grass, I couldn't find him. I hope he ain't on someone's arm. With a wild one like that, my love is bound to one day by the farm. You and I never taught that dog to listen. You and I loved him just the same. You and I tend to him on our own time now. You and I will always have me to blame. Where do you run to, darling? Don't leave that heart upon the shelf. It ain't always easy to see through the eyes of someone else. Where we gonna run to, darling? Won't leave this heart upon the shelf. It's easy to please our man.